Go for it.
Welcome to this episode of In Search of Songwriters Cereal. I'm Trustin.
And I'm Jake.
And we are honored today to have Iowa native singer, songwriter, musician, producer. He does a little bit of all of it, Mr. David Zollo. Great to have you today, Dave.
Good to be here. Good to be here,
right.
Justin. Thanks.
Welcome to the show.
All right, man. I'm a cereal lover. I'm a cereal lover.
Good deal. Gotcha.
Yeah.
I know you started playing piano at a very young age, but if I understand correctly, your career kind of took off in your early 20s when you kind of started playing with a band and traveled across the U.S. and overseas and so forth. But you've landed in Iowa. And can you talk a little bit about, I know there's a rich history in Iowa, and just the choice of,
Sure.
Iowa being...
So what brought my family to Iowa was the Iowa's Writers Workshop, which is a graduate program in creative writing. So my father really wanted to go at the time. Kurt Vonnegut and John Irving, Vance Bergeli, Raymond Carver. These are all the guys that were instructors there.
Yeah.
So I think it took him a couple times and he got in. So I was a little baby. My brother was 3 years old, I think, and they came to Iowa. My parents fell in love with it. So they settled in Iowa. My dad is a music fanatic. My mother is the daughter of a well-known jazz pianist. And my dad had a lot of friends that were musicians in Iowa City. That was the first thing he gravitated towards, was the music community. And so these guys, Bo Ramsey, Joe Price, these guys that wound up being my
kind of
co-workers and mentors, but also peers eventually, and guys that I ended up working with were friends of his when I was a kid. So it was interesting in that I knew these guys when I was really young. But I also ended up working with them throughout my career.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was at the University of Iowa studying cultural studies, American studies, and I basically was in the honors program. I defended my honors thesis and then dropped out of school, and I had a band called High and Lonesome, and we were blessed to have success right out of the gates, and that's what I've been doing ever since. That's been almost 30 years now.
That's a big decision at that point. You have to be that close, and then to do that. I know you've traveled a lot. You travel a lot solo, and you've been in several bands, High and Lonesome and Body Electric here recently, and both leading a band and being a supporting member. But one thing I think might be interesting, a lot of people can identify with, you had an experience of being on The Tonight Show. Can you talk a little bit about who were you playing with at the time? I understand Todd Snyder.
Yeah. So
anything you can share about just that experience?
So in the mid-90s, I was actually playing the show with my band High and Lonesome. I had a reconstructive surgery on my larynx to remove some precancerous growths
which was a major event.
Which is a major event, and I was in my early 20s. That was 94. So 96, I'm still working away in Iowa, and a friend of mine who booked clubs in Iowa City said, "Hey, I got a guy I want you to open for." And High and Lonesome was playing earlier in the evening at the university with a band called the Freddie Jones Band, which was a Chicago jam band. And I said, I'm already playing. He said, you gotta come. He said, this guy's an up-and-comer. His name's Todd Snyder. And I think I was, at that time, vaguely aware of Talkin' Seattle Grunge Rock Blues, which was this kind of novelty hit on the first record, which allowed him to sell a bunch of records and have kind of an unexpected hit. And it was part of, the reason I was aware of it was playing on college radio. So I was in college when that record came out. So this is 96, and I said, all right. So I finished my show with High and Lonesome, ran up the street to this other bar, and I played an opening set. I did, some of my old favorites, a couple Buck Owens songs, and then some of my songs. And Todd had put together, his touring band that wound up being his recording band, the Nervous Wrecks. And I think, he wanted to have a band pattern after like Leonard Skinner, the Stones in his mind. So he wanted a keyboard player, and he just didn't have one. So they invited me to come the next night. I think they were in Ames, Iowa, and then Minneapolis. They played at First Avenue. So I kind of went out and I sat in with them, and a couple days later they called and invited me to join the band. So I became one of the Nervous Wrecks, and that I spent about a year doing that. And Todd ended up downsizing his band. So I'd gone back home. A few years later, he started, when he was making records for John Prine's Old Boy label, he started calling me to play keyboards on the records. And then he got re-signed to MCA, Universal, and made his last major label record, which was the Devil You Know, which I ended up playing on. And piano was featured prominently. So when that record came out, he was invited to do The Tonight Show. And he was invited to do Letterman, which I was also supposed to do. And I was bumped from Letterman because Paul Schaefer wanted to play the keyboard. So that prick, Paul Schaefer, great musician that he is, screwed me out of doing the Letterman. But anyway, it's fine. So The Tonight Show, though, was a great experience. It was, I think I mentioned to you that Jay Leno was getting ready to do a comedy, a stand-up performance, which I don't think he did a lot of, right near Iowa City, where I live, in a casino where I would play occasionally, and he heard that I was from Iowa. He said, "Iowa, I am going to Iowa." I said, "I know, I saw that," and he made some jokes about the town that he played in, and then also it was great. The band leader from the Tonight Show, Kevin. His last name escapes me.
I know who you're
but
talking
he
about.
came up and was like, we were having a smoke out in front of the studio. He said, "You guys must be in the band." I said, "Yes, we are. Does it show?" Yeah. It was a great experience. You know, another thing that I learned the hard way. This is a funny story. They said they did makeup for everyone, right? And they said, "Hey, you gotta get makeup done." I said, "Do we have to?" They said, "No, it's your choice." You know, so they were framing the shots, and they were like, "Oh, you know, I was behind this Hammond organ, that's B3, and they said, 'Oh, that's really cool.' You know, the cameramans were like, 'Yeah, it's a great shot. The camera really likes you.'" So I didn't take makeup. So at the end, you know, the guy came up to me, the cameraman, and he said, "You know, you're not going to be on this at all." I said, "What?" He said, "What happened to the camera loving me?" And he said, "Every time I put the camera on you, your forehead was so shiny.
There's a reason why.
It blinded me." So and sure enough, if you go look at it, it's always a long shot, and I'm barely hitting it at all. So that was a lesson to, take your makeup when...
Every once in a while you can pick up when they do makeup, when somebody's on TV, that it's kind of overdone. You kind of... But at the same time...
Which is why I didn't want it.
But they do it because of exactly
But I'm a greasy Italian, and that was exactly what was my downfall. So it's funny.
You said also, too, that you've been overseas a bit, traveling with your band, and... What's that experience been like for you?
You know, so I first went to Italy, and that was because Bo Ramsey, I mentioned, it was a mentor of mine, and well known for producing Greg Brown's records, but also being the producer on Lucinda Williams' record Essence. And getting a tryout for Dylan's band. I was going to tell you story that Bo had around that same time. I think Charlie Sexton got him the audition, but Bo and Dylan was a real hero to Bo. Bo had just been over with his former keyboard player Radislav Lorkovich and a guy named Dave Moore, who records for Greg's. Wonderful songwriter and a great guy, a beautiful human being, Dave. So they had just been, and High and Lonesome's first record had just come out, and so it got really nice reviews in Italy in the rock press. So they invited me to come.
So you were still young at that.
I was 20. I was only a year into my career. 23, I think at the time. It was just before I had the throat surgery, and so I went over and I did this tour. My first tour overseas was with Ramblin' Jack Elliott, the Bob Dylan's mentor, and kind of a guy who Dylan kind of lifted his. They both ripped off what he got through, frankly. But and then Joe Henry, this great young artist who's now better known as a producer and a writer. He wrote a great book with his brother, a biography of Richard Pryor, of all things, that I read online and didn't realize until I saw who had written the book. And but anyway, Joe was still kind of being compared to Dylan, being the next Bob. There's a million of those, and he didn't like it. He was also married to Madonna's sister. And
Interesting.
And he refused to.
Didn't even know she had one.
Yes, she runs the label, Maverick. That was their label with Sire. And if you brought it up, he would not speak with you. And I understand this guy. Joe Henry was an extremely talented guy, songwriter and producer. He produced these Solomon Burke records, all these great records.
Yeah, his own marriage.
Just a great artist. But so my first, I was probably.
That was your first experience overseas.
Year and a half into my career, my first experience was.
But you've been there a few times
since
then.
I've been there 25.
What's it like playing over there? Compared to anything significant to the States, as far as the audience or the
ultimately,
gigs,
it's the same thing. It's all
you're making music.
You're performing for people that are music fans. There's a certain quality that Ian's very knowledgeable about the music, and I will say I've been going since 2000. So I had an experience in 2004. I think I mentioned to you, Trustin, I had gone right after Rick Danko had toured with the band, and I had a kidney stone. I had fainted. I busted my head open on the street. Wound up in the hospital, and the doctors had just seen a Rick Danko in withdrawal and drug withdrawal, and they were yelling how they didn't want to see any more American musicians. And my grandmother passed away on this trip, and I walked in to the airport in Milan, covered in blood. 24 hours after my experience, and I went to the Lufthansa gate and I said, "My grandmother just died. I need the first thing smoking. Take me out of it." I said, "Yes, sir." Immediately. And within an hour, I was on a plane for New York. Wow. It was amazing. Wow,
they wanted to get me. Care of you then. They wanted
to get me out.
They wanted to get you out for some other reasons.
Scaring the customer. But then in 2010, I started going back and playing with my drummer Brian Cooper, an Italian bass player and an Italian guitar player, and that's been really neat. For a number of reasons. I met this bass player on a tour in 1994 I did with High and Lonesome, my second tour in Italy. And so we've been going back, and for whatever reason Italy has emerged as kind of a good market for me. Because back when these tours were more possible, when there was more of a scene there, just like here, it's changed a lot. I kind of laid the groundwork for building a career there. So I go back, but I just played a place that I first played in '94, and I played there, what was it, 25th? No, it must have been,
fairly recently?
Yeah, it must have been 2014, so it must have been their 20th anniversary, because I played there right after the club opened, and then I just played there on an anniversary, and it really brought home the fact that here are these people that I built these relationships with 20 years before, when I was a very young man, and here I am, a middle-aged musician, worse for wear, and I'm still working with these people, and that to me, is the great thing about this business is it's the people. It's all about the people and the relationships.
I was thinking something else too. Is you said you started out, you met it was Randall and Jack Elliott, right? And did you perform with him, or you got?
Oh yeah, so I opened all these shows with Jack. Now I didn't end up sitting in with him on that tour, but we ended up spending.
He's not the easiest guy to perform with. I mean,
no. Well, he's got a very particular thing that he does, and like what he got through. There's like a lot of old blues guys that I admire, like say Lightnin' Hopkins. Some of those guys like to throw off other musicians, or you got the Art Tatum, the great jazz pianist, who people just couldn't hang with him. He was that good. So Art Tatum almost never recorded with other musicians. He did some trio records I had with Ben Webster and a drummer, which are great. But the point is that Jack Elliott is not the easy jazz. But we sat and played music the night before he left, and we were drinking Irish whiskey. He's not a big drinker.
Anyway,
funny though.
So next question I was going to transition into is, so when you were starting as an artist, you started your career, how old were you again?
About 21.
21?
Yep.
So what was it that made you, I know a lot of artists when they're starting out, it's a big leap. It's pretty scary to say I'm just going to make this career, especially music or fine arts or anything.
Yeah.
What gave you the confidence, and when did you feel like I was good enough to do this, or was that something that you always
I still don't know if I'm good enough. Maybe the last handful of years, I feel like my craft has developed to a point where I can, where I'm comfortable with what I'm bringing to the table. But no, I mean, I really consider this a lifelong education. Number one. Ignorance, though, is what led me. I mean, I had a record label, started in 1994 called Trailer Records, which I saw a significant amount of success with. Ignorance. Had I known what the record business was like, I never would have started that label. And it was just sheer ignorance. However, my grandfather was as I said, a jazz musician. My mom grew up around professional musicians. Just reading an interview with Randy Newman, his uncles were all very successful film composers. Randy Newman discussed how he wanted to be, he didn't know if he would be, but when he was studying music as a kid, that's what he wanted to do. Now, for me, I had stopped playing. I played classical piano growing up, a thing called the Suzuki method, very intensive. And I was really burnt out, even though I was, a fairly embarrassing student when you look back on how little I worked at it. But I stopped playing for a couple, 3 years when I was in college, and I really thought academics was going to be my future.
You were working towards a degree then. You thought
working towards a degree. I thought that's what I was going to do, and then I was in a relationship. We split up. I started writing songs, started playing the piano, and within 6 months, of my first performing experience, I had formed High and Lonesome, was touring and was making a living, and it was that fast. But once I was, I studied abroad for a year in college when I was 19 and 20. I came back right on my 21st birthday. It wasn't even a year later that I was playing music professionally. I really feel like there was a thing where I transitioned into my adult self, which some people would say I've never transitioned to my adult self, and they might be right. This is a business where you can stay young in a lot of ways. But I realized this was my calling in a way that now I was always, I was insecure in a number of ways, and once I started performing, once I became comfortable on stage, which did not take long, a month or two into my career, I realized that this was my, and so many of my insecurities that I had as a young man went away, and it gave me a kind of a sense of comfort in my own skin that I'd never had to that point. And
it became a fit, it sounds like.
It
was a direction that you...
There's a sense that you have been picked to do something, a calling, something that, whether it's the seminary or, carpenter or whatever your calling is, or an artist like you are, a cereal maker, whatever you love and whatever you're passionate about. If you're fortunate enough to do that for a living, insert cliche here. But I mean, for me, it's about the peace that I was a restless young guy, like most young guys, and I suddenly found a level of peace doing that, and I'm grateful for that.
What do you think has been like the biggest obstacles for you in your career as a musician?
For me, health issues. So first was the problems with my larynx, and I was lucky to be in a town in Iowa City where some of the best otolaryngology surgeons in the world happen to live. But and then a drug addiction that almost killed me. So those two things are illness related. You can have the argument as to whether you consider addiction a disease, but I think the medical community for the last 70 years has been clear on that. It is a brain disease, and it just about killed me. So those were the big obstacles, sure. But for me, those were the two big obstacles I faced. And then, excuse me, the industry, the fact that I was not constitutionally equipped to deal with the record business. I'm not a guy who, unfortunately suffers fools gladly, even though I've been the fool myself plenty. So,
but But you appreciated music and the integrity of it.
For me, it was the family atmosphere that I had working with other musicians, whether it was being on the road with these guys or learning from them, or the craftsmen, the having these mentors that taught me my craft. I really viewed it as something that was sacrosanct and not to be trifled with. And unfortunately, you go to some of these industry towns and they could be selling shoes. It doesn't really matter what they're selling.
And that's kind of how they treat music.
And that's completely how they treat music. Painting, books, you take your pick. Art has been commodified, and so
it's about the money and.
But it gave me a sense that I believed that there was a purity to the form, to the art, that I was not willing to mess around with, and that's going to make you an unpopular character.
Yeah, and it's not the easiest thing in the music business because it's not
the easy thing in any business. Business, unfortunately, it's about making money. Yeah. But I also, in owning a record label, realized that there is a middle ground that can be carved out where everybody does all right.
All right, so that brings me to my next question. We talked about this last night a bit, but how do you define success as an artist?
So this is a question you get asked a lot. So I was in Nashville in the mid-'90s when I played with Todd, and I came home for just over a year, and people, at the time that was seen as this like a failure, and not, to me it was, my wife and I are both Midwesterners and Iowans in the truest sense. And, she was trained as a painter. We're both artists by nature, I think, by temperament. Success to me has always been being able to do this thing that I love for a living without compromising my personal ethic. And that's a personal ethic. Yeah. I have many friends who've worked on the corporate side of the music business. That is their prerogative. I don't like the corporate side of the music business, but I don't begrudge them that. Nor do I want to be that guy who's standing there screaming about how things are terrible and things have changed. Things have always been this way. And the exploitation has existed on much more significant ways going back in the history of popular music. But I wrote, and my honors thesis was a biography of my grandfather and his experience and kind of a history of a certain group of white middle-class teenagers that left home in the early 20s because they fell in love with jazz as what they saw as an authentic American art form. And my grandfather was on vaudeville with P.B. Russell and Jack Teagarden, who were his best buddies, and he in fact, my grandpa's best known as being Bobby Hackett's mentor. Hackett was a teenager who my grandpa was forced to hire by some gangster that he had worked for during Prohibition. The year that Prohibition was repealed, my grandpa had a trio gig on Cape Cod. He gave one of the slots to P.B. Russell, who had been playing with Vic Spiderbeck, another great Iowa individual. But my grandfather gave a young guitar player out of high school who just graduated, Bobby Hackett, a job. And after a night of drinking and playing, my grandpa said, I'm going to buy this kid a cornet and you're going to teach him to play like Vic's. So that is the true story of how Hackett became a trumpet player, cornet player. My grandfather had to, even though he worked, my grandfather led the orchestra at a place called the Stork Club in Manhattan, which is a very well-known high society place. But my grandfather had to scuffle, and writing that thesis, had I known 25 years later that my life, 30 years later now, that my life would follow his in so many ways, I might have had second thoughts about what I did, but probably not. The point being that to me, and I think to him, the success was being able to make music.
And
that,
do what you wanted.
Yeah, that is a gift that is greater. As you get older, you realize that how great of a gift that is. And
that's a blessing.
It is, and there's certain things. There compromises and sacrifices that you have to make when you choose that path. But they're well worth it.
Yeah.
To get into your latest album, For Hire, just a little bit of the songwriting process. This is one of my favorites. It's excellent from top to bottom. As far as the lyrics, and the music supporting it. My take, very transparent and raw. Certain vulnerability that you had there. Themes seem to be struggle and addiction that you talked about, along with family, faith, and redemption. Can you talk a little bit about just making this album?
This was this cycle of songs that really emerged from a set of experiences that I went through, this arc where my lifelong drug addiction, due to a number of events that, like the confluence of these events happening in my life, kind of took control, as it always does. I had been a high-functioning addict for many, many years at that point. And I hit a point where I gave in to these things, and my wife had to take our son and leave, and
not easy stuff. Not an easy time.
And for better or worse, as a songwriter, those are the topics I've always explored. It can be uncomfortable for some people, but listen to, and I understand that. But exploring those themes in this record were not only a journey that was healing for me, and it allowed me. A lot of these songs were written in hospitals, treatment centers, jails.
In the midst of the experience.
And probably, along with my family and my faith, that music, as it has time and again, saved my life. And it sounds like something that you would say, a melodrama, but it's very true. Music saved my life.
The opening song, Ain't No God But God, I think there's lyrics in there about your son, Rocco, coming along. How did Rocco's birth influence, just kind of going through all
these
this
experiences? He was 3 or 4 years old when this stuff kind of started to really get out of hand. The great thing about being a parent for me is how it puts the kind of natural narcissism of the young man.
It's no longer about you.
It's not about you at all. If you're really paying attention, you realize that it's now about, and so they talk in the world of recovery or faith about the need to surrender for a higher power. And some people have trouble with that. I never did. I recognize that it could be God for me. It could be something else for somebody else. But ultimately,
your faith played a
no question. But the ultimate thing is that you have to surrender to your faith, as you did to substances, to drugs, and that is the same kind of narcissism that youth, addiction is the ultimate act of self-indulgence, right? And so when you have a child, if you're fortunate enough like me to get on the other side of it, you can, with the help of, the grace of God and your family, you can pick up the pieces. But this record charts, I like to tell people it is reporting from the front lines of
and a lot of people don't get to the point of self-accountability, being accountable for their actions, and you're pretty open about it,
the state of Iowa, which gave me a lot and supported me a lot, also forced me, bless their hearts, to be accountable. So it's funny, I was in Dubuque, Iowa, they're a Catholic town. I'm a Catholic. I was arrested on stage in Dubuque. The Iowa City Police, wanting to really, stick the knife in.
It certainly got your attention.
Called a warrant in and said they knew I was performing up there and they wanted me arrested that night. So I walked down into a sold-out club and was handcuffed on stage and taken away and thrown in jail. And it's a long story. In retrospect, it's amusing, but it wasn't at the time. But I was in Dubuque, and I got a call from a reporter from the Des Moines Register, which is the state's main newspaper, and a great award-winning. If you're a print media fan, the Des Moines Register has a great tradition. I got a call, and they said, we heard you were arrested a couple days ago. So I think the Iowa State Police also called the Des Moines Register to let them know. Mm-hmm. And I said, are you really? I said, is this newsworthy? I said, did somebody not, is there a war not going on? It's like, and I'll never forget what this woman said to me, this reporter. She said, after a cursory examination of our database, I see that we've done 15 or more articles on you, and they've all been positive. And I said, she stopped me in mid-protest, and she said, don't you think you owe us? And I said, you're absolutely right. And I said, it sucks. It's my poor father, who is in national law enforcement, my father-in-law. Well, it's humiliating. It's terrible. However,
in retrospect, though,
the people of Iowa that supported me for years and years and had given my label a lot of free press over the years in this community in Iowa City, musical community I was a part of. It also demanded an amount of accountability, and that's how Iowans are, and that's how I'm an Iowan, and I'm thankful for it. But at the time, it was difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you came through all that.
Me too.
And I'm going to completely, unless you got another question, I'm going to completely kind of change subjects here. We're pretty similar in age. We kind of grew up both kind of sports influenced backgrounds, and you're in Cardinal territory here.
Yes.
You're a Cubs fan.
Yes, I am.
Amazing, you guys hanging in there for some years. Of course, Chiefs fan here too, but finally winning the World Series.
Yeah.
What was that like as a Cubs fan?
It was a transformative experience. I mean, I just had this conversation with my dad about
Is he a Cubs fan as well?
No, he's a White Sox fan. He grew up on the East Coast, which is really strange because all his siblings were Yankees or Red Sox fans, which is how Connecticut is. Giants, Patriots, Redskins, Yankees. That's your only choice. My dad was able to get. He had a Crystal radios, and he got these broadcasts from. So I would get this. Would have been Louis Aparicio. Those were the teams in the mid '50s for the White Sox. But my dad and I had this conversation. He talks about some of his fondest memories. Raising me and my brother was he coached us in Little League and Babe Ruth baseball and was playing catch, and he communicated his love of baseball to us. So baseball is a sports thing for me, but it's also much deeper, like it is for a lot of American kids, whether it's collecting baseball cards we talked about or throwing the ball around, whatever it is. So baseball to me is something also like art that in my life was sacrosanct. So your team, this who you affiliate yourself with. Now, at the same time, my son, in a fitting piece of karma, is a Cardinals fan. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, listen, we appreciate you being
My
on the show
absolute pleasure.
and being here in Springfield with us.
Yep.
We're wondering here in just a minute if you might mind doing a song for us.
Sure.
But before we do,
Yeah.
we have one very important question we always ask every guest on the show. It's maybe, as we say, maybe the most important question.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. What's your favorite cereal?
As you realize, I'm a talker and a thinker, so I can't answer that with just
Gotta have an explanation.
I got to tell you why it is no longer the cereal that it was. So I loved these Honey Graham O's. Do you know the O's?
Oh yeah, I had those.
My wife calls those crack cereal.
There's a little bit of sugar in there,
a lot of
sugar high.
But my son and I recently, so I was in 2011, right after I got sober, I became very sick with what they thought was an autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
It turned out it was drug-induced lupus. So I had taken an antibiotic called Levaquin, which we know now is a neurotoxin of some kind, but it made me sick, and for almost a year I was very sick, so I went off gluten, and Chex cereal at that time had removed gluten from all their products. Yeah. So my son and I just recently discovered a new flavor of Chex peanut butter. Chex.
I'm not even aware of that. That's good.
Oh my God! It is.
So you're saying I should pause on Tony the Tiger Frosted Flakes for a little bit just to try that?
Whatever floats your boat. I'm not going to tell anybody. I would hate for you to give up your favorite cereal because I know how important cereal is to me.
Yeah.
Peanut butter Chex, boy.
Oh man.
Yeah. Nice.
Well, hey, thanks for being on the show. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah,
that was awesome.
Thank you, Jake. Yep.
All right.
So I'll do a Dylan song for this. You can come after me for the royalties if you want. stone filled with rubble, ancient footprints everywhere. You can almost think you see it double. Cold dark night on a Spanish day, got to hurry on back my hotel room. What I got me a day with a pretty little girl for breaks. She promised me she'd be there with me when I paint my masterpiece. And the hours we spent in the Coliseum, dodging lions, wasting time. Those mighty kings of the jungle, I can hardly stand to see them. Well, it sure has been a long, hard drive. Train with a run, the back of my memory. On a hilltop far away, a pack of wild geese. Someday everything will sound like a rhapsody when I paint my masterpiece. Sitting around the world in a dirty gondola, all to be back in the land of Coca-Cola. I left Rome, landed in Brussels, on a plane ride so bumpy I almost cried. Clergymen in uniform and young birds pulling muscles. They were all there to greet me when I stepped inside. Newspaperman eating candy had to be held down by the big police. Someday everything is gonna